city for one of my regular monthly meetings at the cathedral. I went by bus, which meant that I would be walking around the streets of Brisbane with thousands of other people who were either shopping or going about their business lives. But there were two men who stood out for me that day. Both were in different parts of the city, but sadly both were in the same situation. Sitting on their particular street, dressed rather shabbily, each of these men had a sign on the ground in front of them. The first announced to the world that this particular man was in all sorts of difficulty. "I am 24 and homeless," the sign said to all who passed by. The second man I saw in the same situation, his sign too announced that to all the passers-by that he was homeless as well at this stage in his life. Neither of these men seemed to suffer from poor health. They just seemed to suffer from poor predicaments as they sat alone on the street where I assume they did not want to live. Through the signs that sat in front of each of them, these two men were seeking some assistance for their unfortunate situation in which they now found themselves from all the people who were walking the streets that day. There were thousands of people walking in all directions straight past these two men who simply sat in the street in silence, hoping that their simple signs would garner some assistance for their plight. I was one of those thousands of people who were walking in the street that day, and it seemed to me that everyone, myself included, simply walked past these two men and did nothing to reach out to them in their plight. They were almost invisible to the thousands of people who were simply going about their daily activities. People who did not seem to have the time to stop and provide some word of support and consolation to these two men of the streets. It is a sad indictment, I think, on our society and on our world that two men should be relegated to such a dismal experience within their lives, that no one seems to be willing to endeavour to make a difference for them. I think it may have been the case with our two widows, about whom we've heard so much today. The first widow, poor and invisible to her world, was going to share a last meal with her son before they would die from isolation and from poverty. The second widow came to the treasury to make her own contribution to the coffers of her society. She too was poor and isolated. She also seemed to be invisible to the world around her. There were rich and powerful people. They came to do the same as this widow, to provide to the coffers of the treasury. And their arrival would no doubt attract great attention because of their presence on that day. But the widow, this widow was invisible as she placed her two small coins on the collection plate and then, I assume, went off home. No one would see her. No one would notice her. No one. But then Jesus was watching. He had seen the rich and the powerful arrive, and he had now seen this widow come to the treasury to place her wealth into the general coffers. Jesus had noticed her presence. He had seen what so many others perhaps had missed, that this woman, who had nothing to her name, gave all that she had for the sake of others. It may have been just two small coins, but she gave completely of herself. Jesus had seen what had happened, and he acknowledged her commitment. The world in which we live today continues to be filled with those poor and the outcast. So often they are the people that are invisible to our society. Like the two men I had seen sitting in the streets of Brisbane the other day. They seem to have no hope of finding a place in our world. They are the poor. They are the people of our world who have no voice. Sometimes they are as public as those two men on the streets. But at other times they can be the isolated and the refugees who are so often denied a place to share in our world. The challenge for us, perhaps, is to respond to the needs of the people who do share our world, but not the rich resources that are so available to many of us. The challenge for us is to be willing to see the widows in our midst, those people of the streets who perhaps maybe are denied a place with us in the world. Time and again, they sit, relegated to the streets of our cities and towns, begging perhaps just to be acknowledged, begging for a chance at living life as best as they are able. As people of faith, as the disciples of Jesus Christ, we are meant to look and see, to see the plight of such victims in our world, to look, to see, and then somehow try and make a difference for them by our lives. Our call is to respond to the needs of the poor. Our response is entirely a matter for each of us.